All right, machines are superior to free weights, mostly. So this is going to be a controversial topic, and some of the points I'm about to list are just outright fact, and then some of them are opinion or subjective. But by the end of this video, you'll be thoroughly more convinced that machines, at least a good amount of the time, are better than free weights, at least for hypertrophy, but a whole host of different reasons. So let's get into it. I'm gonna start doing the Jason Blaha intros as an homage. Also, I'm natural, so if I'm just sitting here like this, I don't look like I lift. So I gotta flex at the start of the video, so otherwise people won't want to watch. Anyway, neural adaptations and technique learning curves. This is the biggest point, in my opinion, against why machines are superior to free weights a lot of the times. Because when you first start doing a technically difficult movement like a barbell box squat, or a barbell squat, or fucking, anything that takes or requires quite a lot of technical prowess and is a multi-joint unstable movement, you can't recruit all your motor units. Thus, you can't then create as much mechanical tension. So there's going to be a certain amount of time where you're becoming neurologically efficient at that exercise. You're getting better and better over time at recruiting all your muscle fibers, which means in that, fucking potentially weeks, months, even years frame of time, in the case of a barbell squat, it can take a long fucking time before you get technically proficient enough to use all your high threshold motor units, which means you won't be making as much actual contractile strength increases or myofibrillar hypertrophy or addition. So when you first start, that's okay, because when you first start training, you'll fucking look at a barbell and adapt. But what people a lot of times will do is they'll switch out exercises, or they'll start doing new exercises, or maybe after 2 years, you're still not fully neurologically adapted to the squat, and therefore you're not making optimal gains. Whereas if you just went straight to a Smith machine barbell squat, there's no stability and fuck all technique required. Within a week or two, you'd be technically proficient at that movement, and therefore able to go closer to failure or to failure and actually recruit all your muscle fibers or high threshold motor units, creating more mechanical tension, creating more actual pure strength gains and pure muscle gains versus neural adaptations. Neural adaptations means less gains, because yes, you are increasing weight, but that's only because you're not using all your fibers yet. You're just getting better at using your fibers over time. That's not going to give you the optimal hypertrophy response you're looking for. So anything that requires a shit ton of technique is oftentimes a free weight movement. And there are obviously free weight movements like barbell curls, where obviously it's a free weight, but it's a single joint mover, or, everything's multi-joint, but it's much more isolative, and thus there's nowhere as much technique required. Whereas if you do a fucking clean and jerk, I mean, it'll take fucking decades before you're fully neural adapted to a fucking clean and jerk, which is super technical. And there's a whole host of other issues that come with really technically demanding exercises, which I'll get to in a second. But that's the first one, is you will not grow as quick initially until you become really neural adapted to that movement. So that's the first one. It's going to take longer before you start making pure hypertrophy gains. Next point is that machines are safer, especially for high intensity training and the injured. If you're injured, you don't want to be fucking around with heavy free weighted movements where stability is required. Anytime stability is required, there is a higher likelihood of injury. And thus, if you want to say safer, and in a high intensity context, when you're going to absolute balls to the wall failure, you're more likely to break down your form, especially if you're a bit newer to training. So in a hit context, there's a reason why you see Dorian Yates and Mike Menser and all those guys on machines a hell of a lot more than free weights. Is because generally it is safer. It doesn't need a spot. There is no stabilization required. There is not as much technique required, and therefore you're safer. There's not much more I can say on that, other than then if you don't want to be injured, which will take you out of training, then use machines. Even if you're not doing high intensity, or even if you're not injured, if you're doing heaps of volume, still use machines, because they are safer. There's not as much stability required, and therefore safer, and less torquing forces on the joints, less likely for a slip up, less likely for a barbell to drop down on your neck. If you don't have a spotter, Smith machine is much safer because it has mechanisms in place that will stop the barbell from fucking killing you. There's a whole host of reasons why machines are safer, and safety should be a priority when you're training, because it means longevity. Next one is consistent parameters, which essentially means you're going to progressively overload more honestly. So with very technically proficient exercises, even if you are neurologically adapted, it's not to say that every rep is going to be exactly the same. You can't always have perfect technique every single rep. So if you're doing barbell bench press with 100 kilos one week, you get perfect 8 reps that week, but then the next session, even though you've technically gotten stronger and bigger, you might try 102, but your form's a bit off, or maybe your technique's a bit off, or maybe you're just not as stable this session for whatever reason. All of a sudden, you only get like fucking 4 reps, and you're like, holy shit, I got weaker. Maybe I'm not bulking hard enough, or maybe I'm not doing this good enough, or maybe my fucking program is off. No, your reps were just slightly inconsistent this time around. Whereas if you're stuck into a machine which has no variability, then the reps are going to be 100% each time, which is perfect for standardization. And that way, you know you're honestly progressively overloading or honestly regressing. If you're actually regressing, you'll know it's honest. It's not just because of a misgroove or what have you during your reps. You'll know it's, okay, no, I'm probably too much in a deficit, or my programming's off, because the machine won't lie to you for the most part. Obviously, if you go to full range of motion one day on a Smith machine barbell bench press, and then the next session you do a half rep, yeah, a bit different. But there's no technical requirement or stability requirement, and thus reps stay way more consistent, which is perfect for honest progressive overload. Next one is better resistance curves. So there's a whole host of different examples of this, but I'll just give 2. If you like dumbbell kickbacks, well, you probably don't, because they're shit. The dumbbell kickbacks, you get like 2 inches of range of motion at the end range where you feel anything, and then the rest is just fucking swinging momentum. It's garbage. A great movement, because it's the best way to contract the inner head of the tricep, because the further you bring your humerus towards your rib cage, the harder you contract that muscle. But with dumbbells, they're shit. With cables, they're fucking great. It's resistance all the way through. Dumbbell incline press. I love this movement. However, it is better to do a machine press, because when you come to here with dumbbells, now your arms are locked. You have no resistance in your pecs for the most part. I mean, or very, very minimal resistance. Whereas if you use a machine, it's resistance all the way to the top and back due to the leverages and the moment arms of the machines. Not all those machines are perfect for this. They're specifically designed to give you the best resistance curves and the resistance throughout the range of motion where it most hits the muscle, which is generally the mid-range. So machines oftentimes give you better resistance curves due to the fact that you have cables rather than just using straight up gravity against your own biomechanics. Next point is stabilizer muscles bullshit. So this has been well debunked by now, but some people still believe that there are muscle fibers within your fucking pecs, for example, that don't activate unless you are doing a movement that requires stability. This is bullshit, and it's been very well debunked. But what stabilize the muscle really are secondary movers, or way beyond secondary movers. For example, a incline dumbbell press, we'll use that again. Your chest is the prime mover, your triceps and front delts are secondary. Third is your bicep, because your bicep stops your arm from opening up with the dumbbell in your hands, right? And if you are using that bicep, that's what you're really trying to focus on, then it's harder to really feel your pecs. That's a stabilizer muscle. Not particularly a muscle we're really looking to work during an incline dumbbell press. Whereas with a machine, that bicep no longer has to stabilize anywhere as much, which means you can focus far more on the pecs, front delts and triceps, not the biceps. The biceps would be a totally different movement pattern. So the stabilizer muscles is, I mean, if you don't know that by now, it's fucking stupid. There are no such thing as muscle fibers within your muscles that stabilize the weight. Next one is they are oftentimes quicker and easier. So a good example of this would be if you're doing a barbell bench press, you have to take weights on and off heaps. It takes way longer to drop set if you decide that that's what you want to do. Whereas if you do a cable machine with a stack at least, then it is just a mere matter of moving the pin around. That is much quicker and much more adherable for someone like me that doesn't have a whole lot of time. Putting plates on and off a fucking barbell, I already don't like using barbells for the most part, but when I do, it's like, man, this is monotonous as shit. Whereas with a cable stack, it's just like bop, 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 fucking quick and easy as fuck, especially for drop sets. So that's a quick and easy one. It's just much easier to set up. Whereas, you know, dumbbell presses, like you got to get the dumbbells on and off, and then you got to get the fucking machine or the bench and set it up on an incline. Whereas a machine, it's already fucking ready to go for you. So, you know, for some this won't matter, but for some this would matter. The idea that you can do something quicker and easier to adhere to can make all the difference for someone's adherence to the gym or enjoyability in the gym. And enjoyability comes adherence. So I like machines a lot of times just because of the simple fact that they're quicker and easier to get in and out of and adjust. All right, next point is raw, honest strength. So anytime that there's no technical requirement, you know exactly how strong you are. There is a good example of this where you compare strongmen to powerlifters, and powerlifters out bench press strongmen with a barbell because they're more technically efficient, but then you put them into an incline barbell incline press machine or any sort of pressing machine that's similar movement pattern to an actual barbell bench press, and the strongmen win out. Because the strongmen are fundamentally stronger because they're fucking, 80 kilos heavier half the time, and they can contract with more force, but they're not as technically efficient because strongmen don't really practice the bench press. But whose raw strength is better? Well, it's the strongmen. If you put them into an actual competition where there's a myriad of lifts, where they're not super technically efficient at any of them particularly, although they do practice them, don't get me wrong, but what they're really looking to do with strongmen is just be fucking strong as shit, partially by being, 6'8", 200 kilos of ab individual, just genetic elite freaks. But it's not like strongmen are weaker than powerlifters. It's just that powerlifters are more technically efficient at the lifts that they do. They practice them way more. Although the people that hold the world record in deadlifts are strongmen, because unlike bench press, strongmen do practice deadlifting a fuck ton. So that raw strength combined with neurological adaptations then allows for the best deadlifts we know. I mean, Hafthor, Bjornsson, Eddie Hall, I don't know who's below that, but the fucking top 5 are like actual strongmen, apart from maybe that Jamal dude who's, sumo lifter, but whatever. I digress. You get much more honest readings of your strength in machines. There's a reason why when you go into an exercise science lab and they're trying to test these athletes for pure strength, they don't have them doing deadlifts and bench press and squats. They have them fucking hooked up to a machine like a hydraulic press, and they do an isometric press or isometric leg press to get the actual reading. They're not doing fucking technically proficient exercises, because who's going to win that out? Olympic lifters and powerlifters, but they're not necessarily the raw, strongest people on the planet. That probably goes to strongmen. So if you don't really care too much about powerlifting movements like bench press, squat, and deadlifts, which aren't necessarily the best hypertrophy lifts either, then consider doing machine movements to get your raw strength. And then if you decide you want to do a barbell, bench press, strength is strength. If you can fucking if you can machine press a fuck ton of weight, you can probably also bench press a fuck ton of weight. And then if you really want to get good at it, spend 6 months getting neurologically efficient. This is especially important to understand if you're into athletics. Getting really strong at the bench press will make you better at whatever sport you'll probably most likely get you better at most sports, especially contact sports. But it's not like the bench press works one-to-one to your sport. When was the last time you bench pressed anyone in your sport? Whereas having just pure pec and tricep strength could help massively if you're a fucking, MMA athlete and you just want to press someone against the wall. Whether you can bench press 200 kilos or you can machine press 200 kilos, it makes no real fucking difference when you're just trying to output force for your pecs and triceps. Whereas with the machine, you're less likely to get injured, you're more likely to honestly progressively overload and spend less time trying to get neurologically adapted. Or if you're trying to get better at sprinting, there's no real difference in, barbell squatting free weights 200 kilos or Smith machine, lifting 220, because typically it's a little lighter feeling with a Smith machine. What matters is that your legs can contract a fuck ton of force when you're trying to sprint really fast. And then all that matters is the technique involved in your sport. There's no huge difference between how you develop that raw fundamental strength. Only you might be able to get that raw fundamental strength quicker if you use machines that don't require the neurological adaptation. So hopefully that makes a whole host of sense, or makes you mad as fuck and you rage at me in the comments. Next point is machines make leg day fun again. I personally, this is much more of a subjective one. You could definitely argue this point by all means. But for me, and for many, barbell squats and deadlifts are just not fucking much fun. I don't like them. I'm not very good at getting neurologically efficient at the squat. It's taken me years to get any good at them. I'm still not good at them. And then, due to muscular imbalances and a whole host of other shit, injuries, blah, 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 and stability, I can't squat using all my motor units. It wasn't until recently when I bought a Smith machine and a hack squat machine did my legs start fucking growing properly, because I could actually engage all my motor units and not worry about technique or my core giving out, or, these stabilizer muscles giving out, like the lower back, etc. So leg day became way more fun because I started building way more muscle. It was way easier to do because rather than having to get a fucking hack squat or a fucking hex deadlift bar and like awkwardly put plates on either side and try to drag them across, I just put it into the fucking hack squat machine. It's on, off, easy as fuck. So all the different points I just mentioned made my leg day specifically, because, people generally enjoy back and chest and arms, but leg day, I wasn't enjoying a whole of a lot. I added all these extra things into my leg day basically, and it made it great. So this is sort of a minor point, but if you want to make your leg days great, machines will oftentimes make them a lot more fun and adherable, and probably make your legs grow quicker because you won't be adapting for neurology or technique. And a lot of leg movements are very technical. Deadlifts, squats, lunges, Romanian deadlifts, all these different movements are very, very technical. Whereas if you just use machines, you get that out of the way and you're straight into making pure hypertrophy and strength gains. Now is devil's advocates. So obviously the first one is sports specificity. If you're doing powerlifting, then at the same time, if you're doing powerlifting, probably use machines because it will give you that raw strength that I just mentioned, and you'll be able to do everything without having to worry about technique or, safety, whatever. But obviously if you're doing fucking powerlifting, you have to practice squat, bench, deadlift. If you're doing Olympic lifting, you have to practice the clean and jerk and the clean and snatch. But if you're not doing sports that require barbell lifts, like you're doing rugby union and you're just trying to get better at overhead pressing a guy in a line out, it doesn't matter, again, how you develop that strength to do that. It just matters that you develop that pure contractile strength. But if you're doing a barbell or CrossFit, like a CrossFit, a powerlifting, and Olympic lifting, anything that requires, lifting in a specific way for neurological adaptations, obviously this fucking list is ridiculous for the most part. But outside of that, if you're doing other sports that don't require barbells, it doesn't really matter. Just get strong. Next one is a huge one, availability and cost. There are so many fucking machines I wish I had in a home gym, but I can't. So I just then use the next best thing. I wish I had an incline chest press machine, but I don't because it costs money, it takes space. And I don't go to a commercial gym, and therefore I use dumbbells. That's the next best thing. And there's nothing hugely wrong with that. I just ideally would use a machine. This video isn't about being like, no, fucking barbells and dumbbells are shit. They have their place by all means. But I just rather use machines for all the reasons I just listed. But if you don't have the availability due to cost or whatever, then of course use fucking dumbbells and barbells. They're much cheaper and you can get a hell of a lot done with dumbbells and barbells. Whereas a machine, it only has one purpose for the most part. Unless it's like a cable crossover multifunctional machine with, a bunch of different cable attachments and shit where you can get a lot done. A leg press machine serves basically three purposes, you know what I mean? Nothing more. You can't do cable, you can't do fucking back exercises or, trap exercises and shit with a leg press machine. And then there's, leg extension machines. It serves a singular purpose, which might not really make much sense for some people's budget level. So in regards to availability and cost, absolutely, but free weights fucking win out. Way more versatile, way fucking cheaper, way more space, kind or friendly. Third point is everything works. Again, don't get me wrong, man. Like a fucking dumbbell press, probably gonna gain a very similar amount of muscle to a machine press. I'm not so much arguing that point. Although, again, for the neurological adaptation stage, you might not gain as much, but everything generally works. If you take something close enough to failure and you're technically efficient and neurologically adapted, then it's gonna work. It's only then these small minor points that you want to argue, like fucking resistance curves and shit. But then really what matters is enjoyment. Oh, well, that's fucking, I don't know what happened there. Well, the next point would have been enjoyment. And enjoyment is the biggest thing in training. If you're not enjoying what you're doing because you don't like using machines, then don't fucking use machines. Who gives a shit? Because you're not going to adhere to it. So even if it was more optimal, you won't get any fucking gains from it because you won't be doing it. So really, by all means, machines do have their place. Free weights have their place. And these are generally their places. So don't get me wrong, don't argue me with saying, fucking, barbells and dumbbells are blasphemy and bullshit and I'm fucking, making them out to be evil. I use them plenty. I use them half the time because I'm a home gym enjoyer. But only saying that there are times where machines can be superior. Anyway, that's it for today. Peace out, bye.